Welcome to the Air Force Doctrine podcast. On this episode, Lieutenant Colonel Nick Badger Underwood attends the Air University Symposium event on Harnessing AI for Information Advantage. He interviews two of the Air Force Research Laboratory's leading minds on artificial intelligence, Miss Alexis Bonnell, Chief Information Officer and Director of the Digital Capabilities Directorate, and Dr. Stephen Cap Rogers, Senior Scientist for Automatic Target Recognition and Sensor Fusion and AI-enabled autonomy. This episode was recorded in two parts. The discussion begins with Ms. Bonnell and Dr. Rogers joins a little over halfway through. Listen in as they discuss AI concepts, how airmen should approach AI, and implications of AI to our doctrine.
Alexis, thank you so much for being here. I just had the pleasure of sitting through a wonderful talk you did to kind of demystify AI for me. And as a stick jockey or a pilot, you had to use really small words, and I appreciate that you did that. So hopefully we can do that for a larger audience. So thanks for being here.
Sure, absolutely. Great being here. And don't worry, I'll dumb it down for y'all so you get it.
I appreciate it. Thank you. So right now the buzzword is AI. We got AI on everything. And when I hear this, I go right back into the young pilot mode when cyber suddenly became a big thing. And we were doing all kinds of planning. And it was, well, we don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to sprinkle some cyber on it. And I see a lot of that sprinkling happening with this term AI. So let's start from the beginning. What is AI, artificial intelligence? What do we mean when we say this word?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things I really wish is that way back in the day that, someone had called it augmented intelligence instead of artificial, because, artificial really implies that we're making something up that didn't exist before. And the reality is we're really just curating knowledge at a level of speed and scale, that we couldn't do before. So maybe from a pilot stick, right? You have a crop duster and then you have an F-35, right? And I think that over time, we've had different levels of relationship and speed and scale, right? And so when you think about just getting a plane off the ground was getting something on paper, maybe your crop duster was Googling it, right? Now we're talking about kind of F-35 or better, the better planes than I do, right? But really that idea of like, how do we have a relationship with knowledge at speed and scale? And that knowledge, and not all AI is the same, right? So that knowledge could be as simple as, hey, something to detect rust on a ship or a plane. And it could be all the way to helping the pilot actually navigate or attack a mission. But I think most importantly, the way it's coming up a lot right now is really the generative AI, right? Which is really large language models. And again, what those really are is an opportunity for us to curate lots more knowledge than we could before with intentionality faster than we did before.
Let's talk about the word knowledge. So we talk about that. I know it's a big thing. You talked about a lot in your talk about the relationship with knowledge.
Yeah.
And I want to pull apart knowledge a little bit because I think that there is confusion on what exactly that means. So one of the things that happened to me when I was a young ISR pilot that astounded me, I got in theater and somebody told me, a lot of the data that we've collected, all this intelligence we've collected over the last 10 years, we've only used about 20% of it. 80% of it is just this raw data. And so you start hearing these words like knowledge and data, information, and then decision-ready information. It seems like somewhere in this term knowledge, we're interchanging that word. And so I thought maybe you could pull apart exactly how AI is dealing with these things, data versus knowledge versus...
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, Badger, you're introducing a really interesting point, and that is that you'll notice that I say knowledge, I don't say data or information, right? And to your point, the way that we have historically had a relationship with information or data has been one of what I would describe of control, right? We want to clean it and perfectly structure it and have it, have everything be really confident about it. And that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is, to your point, it means that we only have so much time, toil, and treasure to organize, information and data. And so what that meant, like you said, is we were leaving a lot of information on the table. So what AI now allows us to do is to take information that wasn't perfectly clean or structured. And Badger, if you think about it, that after action report, maybe that you did, there's an incredible amount of really pertinent information there. But it's also knowledge because when you wrote up that report, your own expertise and experience was applied in it. And there was value in that. And so one of the reasons I talk about AI very intentionally about a relationship with knowledge is because it isn't just the AI that might be bringing information or data. It's the relationship or what we tell the AI to do with it, right? And so, again, you may have a very different experience. And this is why when someone sits down, for example, with a ChatGPT or a Google or a large language model, they can be given the same subject, but you're going to query, right, or ask questions of that information differently than I will, right? And that's actually a really great manifestation of how our knowledge, exists uniquely. And so I think that one of the things that really does for us in the Air Force is it means all of a sudden, thanks to AI, APIs, cloud, all the wonky technical technologies you hear about, all of a sudden we can take that 80% of our real knowledge treasure, right? At a place like Air Force Research Lab, that's our research, right? And all of a sudden, that unstructured knowledge that we paid and dedicated so much of our lives to can go into play, right? So as a general, as someone who may be needing to make critical decisions, I can choose, is this the type of decision I want to make with purely structured, perfectly clean knowledge? And that might be the case if you're talking about 2 + 2 = 4, Alexis, so we got to pass the audit. But when you're talking about something like what might the adversary do, I would make the argument that all of the treasure in that unstructured information should be on the table, because the reality is there's no right answer, right? And so what I love about knowledge is that it's really where the coldness, if you will, of data and information meets, the warmth of our humanity and our experience. And it's when those two things are mashed together that we call it knowledge.
Mm-hmm. To follow your after action report analogy there, many times I've written many of these, and
I bet you have.
I thought, well, who's reading this?
Yeah.
I mean,
and maybe no one, right? That's the really sad part.
The solution was Badger make it shorter.
Yeah.
So more people read it, and then you lose a lot of that information that's in there.
And Badger, with that, I think you're actually touching on something that's a really interesting moment for us of opportunity that goes unspoken a lot when it comes to AI. And that is, if you think about it, there was absolutely incredible learning and reflection, and that's why you wrote the after action. But to your point, how many people really read it? How many people actually could access it and who didn't have to go through some kind of toil, right, to find it, to know where it was? And so this ability not just to be able to create and unleash knowledge, but the ability to find it in human ways, to find the right information at the right time, at the right moment. Your after action report could have an incredible detail that someone really needs in the future. Right now, think to yourself, how hard would it be for them to find it? And most importantly, in the moment they really needed it. And I think what is incredibly promising about AI is saying that incredible insight that Badger came up with, it is now has the potential of being more accessible in the exact moment that we need than ever before.
I agree. And I'm thinking, this is not a new problem. I mean,
Nope.
In the 60s, they were talking about how do we read more action report? How do we congregate and structure more of this data? So what has changed now that we're going, okay, AI, which in some form has been around for years,
Yep.
why are we suddenly now going, okay, we need this because we needed it for decades?
Yeah. So I think Alexis's hypothesis would be, why this, why now? I think, first of all, if you look at any other type of technology that kind of hits, think about in our personal lives, so Uber or Airbnb, et cetera. One of the things that had to happen is different parts of technology had to come into existence and into practice. So, for example, geolocation, being able to do a credit card transaction, right? There are lots of things that just weren't ready when you think about putting them together. And so the moment that some of these things emerged was not only the technological readiness, but also you had to have something like, gosh, there's not enough taxis. Or, I'd really love to explore the city in a different way. So there's also the human side demand. And what I would argue about where we find ourselves with AI right now is we're facing a fundamentally different level of pressure and almost like an entirely different game board than we did even a couple of years ago. And I think because of COVID, some people recognize that things are different, but they don't recognize the magnitude of how you are expected to show up as someone contributing to national security. And I'll give you a couple of examples of what I mean by that. So the first is our change paradigm in defense tended to be 5 to 15 years. And so it made sense for us to kind of navigate. And at some point, if you think about it from an IT lens, everything becomes legacy, right? Oh, that legacy system, I don't like it anymore. It doesn't do what I want. And normally we had about 5 to 15 years. What happened in the last few years is that change cycle shortened down to about 6 months to 1.2 years. So all of a sudden, people are being asked to adapt and change faster. So what that means at an individual level, and I don't know, Badger, if you feel like this, but do you feel like I'm getting more emails than I used to, right? I'm having to make more decisions. I'm not keeping up with the volume of things. And I thought, quite frankly, I was like, I'm just getting old, right? Like this just, I'm getting close to 50 and heck, I just can't keep up anymore. But when I actually started to run the numbers and it was like, no, we're really being asked. And in most cases, the average person is being expected, and especially the average leader, is being expected to make 5 times the amount of decisions in the same period of time that they did only a few years ago. So incredible change paradigm, lots more decisions, but then you add to that, Badger, all of a sudden we can access this treasure of information, this unstructured data that we couldn't before. So now I'm a leader who not only has to make more decisions because there's change, I got to make them faster in that change paradigm, but now I've got 1,000, maybe 1,000,000 times more points of data and information to apply to those. And so when you think about it, again, most of the time, technologies become popular when we actually need them, right? And so when you look at that construct, it makes a lot of sense as to why AI is that augmentation or kind of that super processor or ally that you might kind of say, hey, I can't sort 1,000,000 things and the boss has got to have an answer. I need an ally, right, to help me do that. Now, the incredible thing about that is that it doesn't absolve you from then asking for the right stuff or deciding whether that thing it gave you is really the story you want to tell, that you trust it, that the facts are right. But the ability to do that and to see what those options are, you kind of wormhole the OODA loop. It's like, let me get there a bit faster. And I think that's really why now AI is really becoming, I like to joke that it used to be the nerd and now it's the homecoming queen. Like, when did she get so popular? Well, this is why.
You made a very interesting point, and you do so in your talks. It builds off of Moore's Law, and I'll let you talk more about that than I do. But the idea is not just that artificially or some policy has decided us that we need to make more decisions faster. We've done a number of podcasts on the changing character of war, and a large driver of that is the way in which the amount of data has changed. I'll let you talk a little bit about that, but along with the data changing, the number of variables in which the leader has to consider is grown exponentially. So I did make the statement earlier that the 60s we had these problems, but perhaps the variables and the amount of data that you had to consider was considerably less. And so now it's going beyond our capacity, even if it may have been there as well. War has always been a complex thing. But so I think that's interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit about, just because you emphasize it so much, how the amount of data has changed.
Yeah, I mean, I think to drive this home, and quite frankly, I'm confronted with new examples every day, and each one of them is a bit overwhelming. So I'll give you 2. One is that a single drone in a single hour captures more surveillance than an entire fleet did a decade ago.
Wow.
Think about the number of drones, not only that we have, but the adversary that others have. And so the average Tesla, I think, if I'm not mistaken, takes a terabyte of information in a day. And so when you juxtapose that also, the fact is that we as humans are making a lot more decisions. And so one of the things I was really interested in is it's not just in professional capacity, right? If you think about it, you used to go and order a burrito. Give me the El Mama Grande. That was my favorite order. Now you actually have to make 42 decisions to decide exactly what you want in your burrito, right? And it sounds silly, right? But attention is a precious thing. And so this question of not only how do we spend our attention, but how do we do that with all of the increasing amount of information available? And I think the final factor in that for me is really the fact that this ultimately becomes about time. If someone asked me once, what's the most important weapon that the Air Force has? What's the most important platform? My response was actually, I think our most important weapons platform is time. The question of if we're wielding it or not is really, I think, the one that we are finding ourselves, on the forefront of. And ironically, the only thing the adversary and we have the exact same amount of is time, right? And so this question of what are we going to do with it in light of all this information, in light of these decisions, in light of a 24-hour news cycle, right? These are just fundamentally different times. And I know everyone says that, right, every few years, but I really would say that this is fundamentally different in the way that the internet was fundamentally different, 30 years ago.
I would tend to agree with that, watching planning evolve over my 20 years in the Air Force. When you do a mission analysis or anything, you analyze in space, force, and time. And I've watched the time analysis grow and grow and grow, because I think we're starting to realize exactly how precious, as a force, how precious that is. And so we've kind of hit that AI allows us to increase and strengthen our relationship with knowledge, either through the processing of data, or providing us more options, allowing us to consume more of that. I know we'll get into exactly where it puts us at the yard line. I don't want to get ahead of your analogy there, but one thing I do want to talk about is, following my comparison earlier to cyber. Cyber came out and that was, I got to go talk to the cyber guys. Is AI, I got to go talk to the AI people?
No. So I actually think no. And this is one of the things why I'm so passionate about sharing this with others. The beauty of where the technology has gotten and the ability to have a relationship with language through words, right? I don't need to necessarily write an algorithm to be able to get value out of your after action report, right? I can ask things in just being a normal person, right? I'm a fully qualified human being, right? And I think what's going to be really interesting about this idea of having the relationship with knowledge within words is that what we're actually finding is the people who we assume are going to be best at this. And so, for example, within using like a ChatGPT or a large language model, we'll hear references to prompt engineers, right? We can kind of imagine they're like the cyber specialists, right, of today, prompt engineers. Well, when you break it down, what does a prompt engineer really do? They're really good at asking questions that get exactly the right things they want out of a collection of knowledge. So we assumed that the best prompt engineers were going to be engineers, right? It's right there in the title, Alexis. It's obvious. Or they're going to be coders, or they're going to be data scientists, right? Those are the people. That's not at all what we're finding, Badger. The best prompt engineers are lawyers, PR people, moms, right? Because if you think about it, how many times did I have to ask my son, a question 6 different ways to actually get the answer out? And so what I'm excited about is that AI actually makes a much more democratized platform for everyone to make a difference to the mission in ways that maybe we previously kind of siloed them. Maybe we discounted some of the things that they brought to bear, or maybe we assumed that they had to have a lot of qualifications, right? And a lot of masters or PhDs to be useful to us. And I think at least with generative AI, what we really need is people to be curious. We need them to ask questions that help us kind of ask and answer what if faster than the adversary does. That isn't restrained by code. That doesn't need another, doctorate on the wall. That's, are you willing to ask great questions? And I think in some ways, my concern is, have we kind of beat the curiosity out of people? And what does it look like to bring the curiosity back and let people explore and build the richness of that relationship with knowledge?
I know there's a lot of knowledge available out there, and I have questions. And so I start to go, okay, well, how do I interact with AI? We have ChatGPT, that is AI. Mm-hmm. But is a software program, is that AI? What is AI? Mm-hmm. Is it, I think that confuses a lot of folks.
Sure. So first of all, it's not magic. It's math. It's in essence prediction at scale. What that really means is that I'm telling the machine, here is what I want you to do with this information. And when we think about, in the case of large language model AI, we're in essence taking a huge amount of information and allowing the machine to average it, right? To predict what might be more or less useful based on what we're querying. But we could also have machine learning or more like image classification. So as an example, if I am using a drone to detect, rust, or one of my favorite cases in my life before this was they're an industry right now. They have drones that can detect a screw that is a half turn loose in a windmill 300 feet in the air. And so that idea of really, but to me, Badger, all of that is knowledge, right? Because if you think about it, what I used to have to do is send someone climbing up 300 feet in the air in order to obtain that knowledge, right? That image, that understanding. Now I can do that very quickly and say, well, do I need that guy to climb into 30 planes, or can they just climb into one, right? Or go up 300 feet 20 times, or just once? And so I think it's really, again, what do we want to have the relationship with knowledge on? But it isn't complicated. It's really, especially in generative AI, it's just prediction.
Where can I use it? I think we've started getting into that.
Yeah.
An analogy that I was working with, or having a conversation with Andrew, and they had one of the issues we were having in ISR is what the guy on the ground wants to know is whether or not the enemy is armed. I mean, that's what they want to know. Well, it takes a long time to train a sensor operator to look for things such as gates, such as, all these cues. And so you can eventually do it, but I said, well, can your AI system do this? And the first question they asked me was, can your guys do it? Mm-hmm. And I said, well, about 60% reliably. But they kind of take that percentage and then they make a decision on whether or not they're going to go any farther with that. And he said, well, if I could get you to 60%, as good as you can do it, but I can get you there faster and I can do it over and over. You don't have to train the guy and you just focus on making the decision. Is that better? And I think it cleared up for me. I wanted AI to give me 100.
Yeah.
But a human could only give me 60. And so yeah. I throw that anecdote out there because the next question is really as a leader or as an organization or a unit, I go, where does my unit need AI? Mm-hmm. What are kind of those components and how do I get to that answer?
Yeah, sure. So, I think we always want to start with the sexy stuff. And there's lots of great examples on that. And, the one you just gave is one of those, right? Mm-hmm. But I also think that there's the really unsexy stuff, the toil, right? The amount of people who spend time writing something up or trying to find information, and especially if you look at processes like procurement or acquisitions or others, there's so much that really having the right information there faster is going to be incredible. I also think that, we're going to see incredible changes in things like wargaming, especially also though in things like digital twins, right? If all of a sudden I can, take a plane or take another type of asset and be able to run it in a different scenario, different conditions, then, if we think about, for example, with COVID and getting to vaccines, quicker, one of the interesting things was just the ability really to digitally twin and to be able to say, how likely is that? How likely is that to work? And so I think this question of being able to say, and your example, from Andrew was a great one, which is like, if a human can do it, then there's probably, some elements, but I think where we also want to say is like, but where do we want to keep, that kind of human judgment, right? Mm-hmm. Where does that make sense? And so I think that I call it the AI intentionality line, meaning that if something is going to be a real issue of safety or fairness, then, we really probably want smart pilots, like you and others to be right up with there. But there may be things that we can serve up informationally or otherwise that lets them make those decisions better. But then on the early side, like predictive maintenance, a huge one. Another one, interestingly, and this is where industry becomes really interesting. So another one, if we think about people, is like recruiting, onboarding, and training and education. And so I think that we're going to see in other industries like higher education, they've spent hundreds of millions of dollars in AI to not only, again, help them find, right, the perfect students to come there, help them create an experience that is really fulfilling. And then finally recognizing, for example, that not every learner is starting at the same place. And how can AI help supplement where someone needs to go on a little bit longer journey, and where for some of us, it's like, this is boring. I know this stuff. I want to go faster, right? And keeping someone in that state of flow or curiosity or growth versus, okay, you're sitting here for the fourth time. Quite frankly, I'll give you a personal example, being a little bit new to being in the Air Force and Space Force family in the case of AFRL. But, I was confronted with I think it was my fourth 4-day supervisor training in less than 8 months. And, it's nothing against the training, but I was like, what you really want is for me to be able to have the right information at the right time. And if we think that it's effective for me to sit for an hour and have to consume 60 pages of PowerPoint deck, I'm probably not going to be optimized for that information. Instead, if we said, we really want you to be mindful of this situation or that situation as a great leader so that I can see it. And when that happens, I can say, oh, wow, I remember I needed to be mindful of this. What are my options? What are my resources now that I have to navigate it? And have those instantly at my fingers. Those 2 minutes may be actually way better optimized, right, than the 2 weeks, that we currently do. So I say that because I think it's why it's so important to categorize AI as a new relationship with knowledge at speed and scale. And I'll say one of the things that I've enjoyed the most, coming in as the CIO of the Air Force Research Lab is people always expect me to say things like, well, like which tool or platform or system, or here's the data standard. And that's not what I say, Badger. I say, what's the relationship with knowledge you want to have? How is it you want your people to behave and feel differently about their work in light of applying a great technology? And that tells me what technology to bring, right? And I think sometimes, we make everything about the tech and we don't just step and say, how do we want to be different in light of what this gives us an opportunity to do or to explore? And the reality is, like, the pilots will know, right? Like, you'll tell us as you start to experience, the technology or use ChatGPT or one of the tools that we're coming out with, and you'll start to demand, like, I don't like this anymore, right? Like, have AI do that, or I don't like that. And that's really where just getting on with it and kind of using it is so critical.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's a part of a larger conversation in terms of the technology first. We often, at least at the tactical level, you find technology out there and you go after pursuing that technology instead of really asking what is it particularly that you want it to do. And there is refined processes to do that. Just sometimes at the tactical level, we get a little obsessed with a particular widget.
Well, and with that really quickly, I think one of the things that's a really normal human process, right? And the way that I break it down for people is that there are 4 emotional stages you go through. And if folks listening can actually be really aware of where they are in that stage, it tells them kind of how to navigate it. So the first one is like, ta-da, right? So like you said, you'll see something and be like, oh, that's cool, or I should care about that, or that's really something that, I'm being told I need to pay attention to. So whether that's, AI or anything else. And then you kind of see it and it's like, oh, wow, that is different. Then you go through a little bit of an like, what does this mean? What does it mean for me? How do I use it? What does good look like, right? Then the third part of the journey is like, you answer that question and it's like, here's where it meets my mission, right? Here's where it gives, my guys a little bit more time back. And then finally, you get to, in essence, quite frankly, the blah. We use the example of like, Google it. Well, like, of course you Googled it. Everyone's Googled it. That's boring. That's not new, right? But I think the more as individuals and as leaders, we can understand that that's the journey we go on with any technology, and AI is no different. And the question is, where are you? Have you had your ta-da yet? Have you really put your hands on keyboard to understand what it can do? Are you in the like, what does this mean for my job, for me? Or are you in the aha, like, that it can do that, and I'm very happy for it to do that. But that's not something really that organizations can put upon you. It's something that you actually have to want to know for yourself.
It seems like a general message coming out of the symposium here is this. We've talked a little bit about AI and kind of what it is, what we're trying to do. And if you're a leader or anybody in your organization, the message here is this is out there. This can do a lot for you. We want you to get, and I'll use your word, curious about it. If we get curious about it, we get pursuing it, what we'll find is this actually increases our ability to use it in our pursuit of it. There's one other point I'd like to hit here, just because there's a lot of discussion in the Air Force, and a lot of it is doom and gloom, and a lot of the acceleration of AI is associated with, well, we're falling behind and all of this. And I don't want to focus too much on that, because AI is not just about winning a race. AI is about improving both the way we operate in the military and the way we operate as a society. And I think this can help us across the board. I heard a leader speak not too long ago that mentioned one of the things that he was most worried about was a huge breakthrough in AI could be very disruptive. And I think that would be disruptive both in the military sense in terms of deterrence, but it could also be disruptive, throughout all of industry. And so what is a huge breakthrough in AI? What would that be?
I mean, quite frankly, I think we're already there. I think as soon as generative AI put an ability to take all of our treasure of knowledge, like your after action reports, right? Like my research, and make them accessible to anyone who wanted to exercise that curiosity, that was kind of salvo number one. I think what's going to happen now is the question of really trust. And as I mentioned, people are going to have to go through that process, that ta-da, aha. And so for a pilot, the reality might be that initially, okay, it can do that, but I really want to do this. And the question is, okay, well then maybe that's what it looks like for now. But then over time, it might be like, well, actually, there's my stopwatch, and then there's milliseconds, and maybe I'm happy, right, for the AI. But part of that is a little bit of the trust of what is the right and purposeful place for it to be. And I think that that's a process. So it's not going to be, I don't think it's going to be instant. And this is what I think we really often get wrong as any type of large organization, is that we think we can tell people to do differently without helping them to think or feel differently. And when it comes to a technology, that really is a technology about intimacy. If you think about it, AI is right there with us, right? It's that knowledge. It's, it's potentially in the cockpit. It's in our daily lives. It's in our personal lives. That's a form of intimacy that will have to be navigated, but ultimately kind of invited in. And it has to be invited based on actual value that people perceive. But what I would say is, for those folks who put hand on keyboard or, for example, use Gen AI, what is the state that we want our men and women to be in? And what I mean by that is, a lot of times they're in a state of toil. They're in a state of having to do things that they may know are not necessarily as mission valuable. And so meanwhile, compare that to the state of when someone is discovering or being curious or getting a new information or doing something more effectively. There's almost a high in that. It's like, oh, you feel more in your humanity in that moment when you're optimizing, when you're bringing your best, you're kind of doing something the best you can do. And so, I think the big challenge for us is to make people feel empowered, that that's the state that they should want to be in more. And they'll find in some ways their way to the technology if we allow them to be that way.
It's interesting. We talk about this as an ongoing race. And generally when there's some sort of, I'll use the term arms race, this is certainly not an arms race, but that has a tendency to think we need to train harder, we need to recruit more. But you're talking about the way to win this race is curiosity. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting to me, because what we've really talked about a lot here is here's what AI can do. It can look at these large databases. It can help you process this information. It can help you utilize this information to do the things that only a human can do, and make those decisions. Yeah. And what it seems a leader would need to do in their organization is find out what's of value in my organization. Know that AI can probably help you sift through that data, mm-hmm. sift through that information, get to the point where you can make those valuable decisions. And you just need to get your folks curious about how to do it. And it's an interesting way to win this technology race, is actually driven by the curiosity of our own people.
Well, and if you think about it, again, if change is now a new constant, if 5 to 15 years went down to 6 months to 1.2 years, then what I'm really being asked of as a leader and as a participant in national security is to be a change manager. Like, it's a survival tactic, right? The survival tactic of constant change is curiosity. There's no way you're going to be ahead if you are not actively exercising what could come next, right? What might be next, and how, and in what ways can I command what I have in my fingertips to be prepared for that? And so when we think about kind of the OODA loop, the question is, how long do I need to spend observing or orienting before I can get to action? And so that's why a lot of times I talk about it like, we need to have a ferocious desire to wormhole the OODA loop. Mm-hmm. Time is a weapons platform. I should be spending the right amount of time, but no more than the right amount of time in that observed state. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to make up this scenario. Imagine that you're a base commander and you get a quick note from the FAA that it seems like there's about 10,000 or 20,000 drones that just took to the sky. We're not even exactly sure where, and they seem to be heading for the base. And they're, let's say, 80 miles away. And you know how much time that is. I don't. But there's a certain period of time where we don't know if they're headed to the base. We don't know where they came from, what they are. And so the question is, like, as a base commander, aware of that information, you only have so much time. So what do you do? Well, A, did someone make up this scenario and somewhere in a dusty shelf there's a playbook that you can do? Would you be scrambling to get a hold of people? And, the reality is I actually ran this scenario, and I ran it in a large language model, so public, not even with any of our special, unique information. And I said, if I was a base commander and this was happening, what would I do? I said, give me 40 different immediate things that I should consider taking action on. And it spit those out. And then I went to, some of my colleagues and didn't tell them that it was AI. And I said, hey, these were the 40 options that were come up with. Can you rank them and tell me like which ones are good and which ones are bad? And they did. And not surprisingly, I think about 75% of them were like, yes, these are things you should absolutely do. That took me 30 seconds. And so it isn't in that scenario that the AI should be the one telling the base commander to do, but the base commander's opportunity to take 30 seconds, get 40 options, and then again, sit with the team or any other type of resource. It's just a different option set than we had before. And so again, whether or not that example made sense, I think that's the what if, the curiosity, and what is the information we want to start with at speed. And then we curate. Then the base commander with their incredible experience can be like, oh, that's crap, right? We don't do that. But the ability to spend time in curation versus content assimilation is dramatic when you talk about a crisis.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Now, the OODA loop, I think most of the audience is familiar with that, but it's basically a decision-making model. How do I gather information to make the best decision possible? And the longer it takes you to get to decision, sometimes you have less options because it's taken longer to get to the decision. And so not only does this allow us to process that information to get to better decisions, and in a lot of cases, we're not talking about the AI making the decision, although in some low impact stuff you mentioned it could make the decision, but it allows us to make that decision. And by getting there quicker, we actually provide ourselves more decisions. And so I really like the AI and how it interacts with our decision-making models, whether it's OODA Loop or MAP or any other of the ones we use. We are going to talk to you a little bit later with Cap Rogers. So just to kind of summarize, we talked a lot about curiosity and what we need to do. But if you're meeting someone in the street that has not heard of AI, and it's coming, and we want to know what are one or two things that they need to know about AI, whether they're participating in it or it's going to happen to them.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is you got to go use it. Again, much like Googling it, it's very hard. You can imagine back when that came out, it was very hard to explain to people. You just put in any question and it gives you an answer. And I'm not saying it's the right answer or a good answer, but until you experience that, it's very hard for you to understand what it is in the sense of especially generative AI. So I think the first one is just in your personal life, go and tell it to make you a shopping list or write a love letter to your spouse, right? I mean, it doesn't matter, but I think familiarity is an important part of our expectation when we navigate a technology. And I would just simply say the second one is like, you're totally capable. This is not hard. It's not scary. It's the same in the sense of Googling it, and just go play. Because until you're in that state of curiosity, until you believe that you're capable of doing this and learning this, it stays really scary, and it stays not related to your life or to your work or to your profession or to our national security. And we just can't afford that. We just need people to believe in themselves. And I've got a place here, and this technology has a place as well.
But today we got Cap Rogers with us here. I sure appreciate you coming. Alexis, let's have a conversation about how this is changing the Air Force, how it will change the Air Force, and maybe some conversations about how it should change the Air Force and what some of those issues are. Just broadly, what are the implications of this rapidly changing AI technology across the Department of Defense?
A couple of years ago, there was a study done up at Harvard on previous examples of transformative technologies with respect to national security. And what they concluded was the previous ones were cyber, nuclear, aerospace, biotech. And what they concluded was AI is just as transformative to national security. And just as you can't imagine us going into a fight with somebody who has better aerospace than we do, we can't envision going into a fight with somebody with better AI than us. Its implications are everywhere. There does not exist an airman or guardian who cannot exploit AI to help them do their missions better. Several years ago, I had the privilege of giving a tour through our group by the Vice Chief of Staff, General Wilson. As he went through the organization, he said, Cap, it occurs to him that the enduring advantage of the Department of the Air Force was airman innovation. To which I was explaining to him how I've never been out to a site. I've never been to a base, never been to a distributed common ground station, where they don't trot out some 18-year-old kid who has wired together some Python or JavaScript and done something nobody's ever done before. And so when I said that to him, he says, exactly. Airman innovation has been our enduring asymmetric advantage. And airman innovations, the initials are AI. And what he said, what you're telling me is, if I could let airmen innovate with artificial intelligence, I'd have AI plus AI. And maybe that's not 2 AI, maybe that's AI raised to some exponent. And I figured it might be Aggie math because he was a Texas Aggie guy. But AI plus AI is exactly what every airman should be thinking, every guardian should be thinking about. How can they use AI to do something in their daily job that they could now do better and bring more value to the DAF?
Or what could they stop doing even, right? I mean, a huge amount of the value of AI is this thing I do valuable? And maybe it is valuable and maybe it's required, but do I need to do it? Does it need to take as much of the treasure that I have to bring to this mission every day? And I think in every capacity, really that's on us to ask ourselves. If we really truly are answering the Secretary's call, to the great power competition, to what it is we're seeing from an adversarial context, every day we have to kind of walk in and say, is this good enough? Is this good enough? And the reality is I think AI lets us ask and answer that in a different way than we could even a few years ago.
Enduring asymmetric AI advantage, we're kind of using that term. What does that mean in terms of the spectrum of, are we there? Are we in an advantage? Are we trying to get there?
No. The United States and our allies absolutely have a current advantage in artificial intelligence, zero doubt. A lot of people worry about how long we will be able to maintain that advantage, but absolutely, the DAF's vision is an enduring asymmetric AI advantage on our side of the fence. We have that advantage the way we go about developing, the way we go about testing and fielding, our focus on ethical employment. We will maintain that advantage. It will be enduring.
Mm-hmm. And so what does that look like to the airmen? We talked about AI is kind of becoming a big thing now, and it's easy for me to say something like ChatGPT, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, but autonomous systems, we're seeing all kinds of stuff about AI, dogfighting. What does that look like to the airmen in terms of this asymmetric advantage? We see more and more.
So whether you're an airman or a guardian, what we are completely committed to is ensuring that you have the best AI solutions. And so let's clean up autonomy and AI just briefly. So an autonomous system is something that does something on the behalf of an airman or guardian. The airman or guardian provides delegated bounded authority for that autonomy to do something on their behalf. Some subset of those are enabled by artificial intelligence. Okay, artificial intelligence is not a thing. It's a set of academic disciplines. So what I'm telling you is this enduring asymmetric AI advantage. Every airman or guardian, we are absolutely assuring them that they will have the best autonomous capabilities that are enabled by AI. So for example, you can imagine the collaborative combat aircraft. I am absolutely committed to ensure that our collaborative combat aircraft that are enabled by some of the capabilities on those aircraft that are enabled by AI will outperform any potential adversaries.
You talked about that autonomous, and it's a set of disciplines, and I like that expansion.
AI is a set of disciplines. Autonomous systems are systems that do something on your behalf. Some of them have capabilities which are enabled by AI.
And that's interesting. You talked about earlier, Alexis, about the processing of large data sets is something else it can do. So AI is quite the Swiss Army knife in terms of what it can do.
That's why you need to stop thinking about it as AI is a thing. It's a set of disciplines. Some of the disciplines have to do with processing language. Some of them have to do with processing the platform behaviors. Those are different disciplines which come under this umbrella of creating knowledge and exploiting that knowledge. That is what artificial intelligence is. The creation of knowledge and then the storage of it so that you can later recall it when necessary, when it's applicable, and exploit it. That could be for the control of a platform, air or space platform. It could be for processing of sensor data. It could be for processing of language.
Yeah. It's really, in some ways, we are entering that actual age of, can we have the right relationship with the right information at the right time and the right way? And I think that prior to, even just a few years ago, to Cap's point, there were certain places in AI where we were absolutely mapping our way to advantage. And I think one of the things that changed in some ways was really the barrier that you start to have that is reduced now that, and again, not in all cases or applications, as Cap says about AI, but when we reduce the barrier to where someone no longer necessarily had to code or had to create an algorithm or a parser or be an expert at that in order to, have a relationship with more information. And this is where like the large language models or, natural language processing. Natural language processing just means using words, right? It's just you use words, you understand words. And so again, when all of a sudden we don't have to say, write this code in order to bring up this information, but I can say, what's the latest in autonomy, or what is fill in any knowledge, really, when I can actually have that accessible human relationship with the knowledge, that's really game changing.
We're pulling out here with the knowledge and stop thinking about AI as a thing, which is something I'm certainly guilty of. I want to help airmen maybe conceptualize this. It's not a thing, but we think in terms of things, which is the things that we can see and interact with. And I think it makes the translation hard. In one of our previous discussions, we talked about vision. You mentioned something about transparent battle space, some of these more conceptual ideas. And I was hoping maybe we could talk a little bit about that to maybe help airmen understand how this changes it, other than just an autonomous system or the ability to use ChatGPT to process information. What's the vision?
The way I like to parse that, again, is in terms of the knowledge. Knowledge is what an airman or guardian uses to make sense of what's going on in the world. They create meaning based upon the knowledge that those airman and guardian have. It could be that the knowledge that airman or guardian has, we want to put into an autonomous system. So you could imagine us talking to that airman and guardian and figure out how they do certain things. Hey, if you're a guardian and you're going to do this rendezvous proximity ops situation with your particular spacecraft, there's certain things you consider. How much fuel do you use? How safe is it in terms of the movement? And as you consider those things, I could take that knowledge and code it into actions that I then communicate to the spacecraft to do that on your behalf. So that's an autonomous capability enabled by AI to do something for that guardian. All right, so they could think about, hey, how do I encode the knowledge I have? Or similarly, what is it I would be concerned about if I did that task? And does this AI, is it going to make sure that it doesn't do those things I'm worried about? Are there ethical or moral concerns? How do I responsibly use this AI? So how do I as an airman or guardian, understand where I should employ and where I shouldn't employ this artificial intelligence? So every airman and guardian that's going to be, and they're going to be touching it in a million different ways, has to spend the effort to understand when and how this system is designed, how it should be used.
Well, and I think that's the exciting opportunity, is really to, when Cap and I sit down with people, it's what's the relationship with knowledge you want to have, right? What are the questions you want to ask? And if you think about the way that we have tended to approach digital in the past, it was almost like building time capsules. We would be confronted with an issue or a challenge or data we wanted to bring together, and we would kind of look at the technology of the moment, and we would look at the talent and the legislation, the budget, put all those things together, kind of shake them up in a recipe, and here's the system that we would come out with. And that was very restrictive, because if you think about it, what that required us to do is to really say, what's every piece of insight or information we may want from the system? Well, the reality is when you start to solve something, you don't know everything you want to know. And so if you did, you wouldn't keep getting taskers from leaders asking you for new information or more information. So I think what's really interesting is when we start with that question of what is the relationship with knowledge we want, what we actually get to do is stop building time capsules and start building change engines. Because if Cap asks a question and what he does or what comes out of it might change things, the question is, well, what's the next question? And is the system able to allow me to have a fluid relationship with that information without having to go back, recode, recustomize? I mean, if you think right now about some of our biggest systems, many people would say some of them are really coming to the end of their life stage. I'll give you a great example. Now we have to do another system, and it might cost hundreds of millions, $1 billion in classic time capsule form to build that system. Well, what now if we can actually take great things that we did in that first system? We can use AI to help us with the code transition between systems, and we might find that a lot of what we spent the most money on when we develop a new system was actually the transition from the old. And so if all of a sudden the AI can say, well, I'm going to take that COBOL or Foxtrain or fill in whatever coding language, and I'm now going to make it easier to bring that into the new system. Well, that means we can actually focus when we design the new system on how is it ready for the next thing, the next question, and not so much of our precious treasure in simply adapting from the old to today. We really have to be able to adapt from today to tomorrow in a replicable way. And I think that's where this asking what is the relationship with knowledge you really want to have is fundamentally different than what is the system you want or the tool you need. And that's a huge change, but it's something that, to Cap's point, leaders really have to start asking different questions to get different outcomes or different answers.
It's difficult to wrap your mind around, especially thinking in terms of doctrine. we love to put things in buckets. We have the 7 joint functions, and we're like, oh, well, AI is a fires function, or it's whatever it is. And as we sat down here, my first thing I'm thinking is command and control, right? We are talking about decision making. But what you're talking about there, this change engine, is much broader than simply, hey, this helps you make decisions. Certainly it does, but the ability to allow us to change seems to be a much broader application of this, and I'm struggling to really put this in a bucket, and I think that's the wrong thing to do. I think we need to think of this holistically in terms of how it can help us across. Is that correct?
And then as you think about it, you could then look at your buckets. So, for example, you're worried about command and control. I am too. And so the way I would encourage you to do that is you say, you as an airman who will have uncrewed assets at your disposal, how should I employ them? What's the policy? And then, as you point out, what is the doctrine? And what are the best practices which we need to capture into doctrine so that those that come behind you can build off of what you figured out? But we are absolutely now at this precipice. So in these really interesting mission functions, like you say, we have the mixtures of crewed and uncrewed assets. What is the right policies? And then how do we sort of lay out the processes by which that's going to become the doctrine? We don't know what that mixture is going to be. We don't know how many uncrewed assets. We don't know what mission spaces. Right now, we're trying to figure that out. But that's got to be driven by your guys' thoughts.
Well, and I think, Cap, one of the interesting things you said is really strikes me in, the fact of we don't know right now. And part of what we actually have to get really comfortable with is that it's okay to not know as long as we're asking the question. And this is the difference between, as the rate of change is happening faster, we want things to be able to fit cleanly in a bucket. We want it to be like, here's the right answer. And I think what we're trying to introduce is the fact that it's going to have to be okay that it's the right for now answer. We don't actually have the relationship with time, the luxury of getting to the perfect answer. And that's actually really uncomfortable for us as leaders or people in the line, because we're used to wanting to have the right answer. And so I think the point Cap raises is really, well, if we can't have the right answer, how do we go about and what are our behaviors, right, to seek that? And the reality is that whether it's the adversary, whether it's the hill, whether it is, it is life, society, we're going to get thrown curveballs. And so the question is like, we are not smart enough to know what that curveball is going to look like. What we can do is say, well, we know it's going to require some knowledge. We know it's going to require some insight. We know it's going to require a certain amount of relationship with risk and time to make the call. So how is it that we get comfortable and then use these tools to allow us to be right for now leaders instead of always having to be right leaders? Because I would offer, I don't know if that exists anymore.
Yeah, and you hit on some of the most difficult things happening in Doctrine right now. So we've been given the directive to take risks in Doctrine. So historically, Doctrine, especially at the operational level, it's a conglomeration of best practices. And that's a safe place to be, because I can go out and I can find those best practices and I can put it together and I can put it out there and I know the guidance I'm giving is going to work. But underneath me, the character of warfare is changing violently. And in order to do that, all the things we talked about earlier, the knowledge that's out there, the processing of it, the rate of decision making, the rate of change, all these things are changing rapidly. And a lot of the approaches that are traditional in Doctrine are impossible to follow and still get the correct thing out there. So internally, what we've started to do is move towards a incomplete doctrine as opposed to an incorrect doctrine, because you do want to give the right answer, but in giving the right answer, you end up sometimes pushing the wrong information. And so I say all that to say, what are the questions? What are the things that we need doctrine to answer now? Maybe not with a complete answer for the risk of being incorrect, but what about the incomplete, mostly correct answer that we would look for doctrine to answer?
So let me hit 2 points here. One of which is when we were first putting together Autonomous Horizons Volume 2, The Way Forward, we called down here to talk to the doctrine people. What is our doctrine for autonomy? And it scared me when the response I got was the conservative one. And actually, it was 2-part, one of which, the first part scared me the most, which was we don't need new doctrine because we already have one. We have autonomous agents now in battle, and they're called Airmen. And what scared me is what the first thing I need the doctrine people to realize is the autonomous capabilities we're going to be fielding are not human. They're not airmen. They're not guardians. So I need you guys to push forward on the idea of we would be fielding systems that are not one-for-one replacements. They'll be working alongside you. They'll be doing things as a result of your delegated bounded authority. I need doctrine, incomplete doctrine, I agree, but doctrine that says, what are those capabilities which you are most comfortable employing, given the fact that these things, not unlike you guys, are not perfect. Initially, the doctrine will be buckets. So your idea of buckets, I don't mind from the perspective of a lot of the current AI capabilities I'm doing are buckets because they were asked for by operators to do very specific things. And we're actually getting pretty good at doing buckets. Hey, create an AI solution that can do rejoin. Create an AI solution that can allow this platform to do missile avoidance. Okay, those are buckets. So you could do incomplete doctrine to give me which buckets and what are the constraints on those. And that's valuable. To your point of where we're headed, not just in doctrine, but in technology, is I really need to get out of this single purpose bucket AI approach. Because as you point out, we're going to be going against adversaries who are not going to follow the script that we thought they were going to follow. So that's why you guys are so valuable. The crews on our platforms bring great flexibility. We do a good job of educating and training you guys and gals, and you're doing great things using your creativity, Airmen innovation, Guardian innovation. That's been our asymmetric advantage. How do I best complement that with AI solution capabilities, which are just as flexible? That's where we're headed. That's where we're investing, is these more flexible artificial intelligence solutions. And by the way, that's a problem that the commercial world is not focused on. They can make so much money right now doing these single-purpose bucket solutions. That's just cash machines. A unique military need right now is flexible artificial intelligence capabilities.
I mean, and I would just add, too, one of the things that makes you the ultimate autonomous intellect as a human being, or part of what makes it work, is an understanding of commander's intent. When we think about AI or the relationship we have with technology, etc., we have to be just as intentional in being very, very clear. And that, when I say commander's intent, I don't mean the general. I mean you. You are working with CAP, for example, to create and design AI. The question is, what is your commander's intent? What is it that you're trying to achieve? What is it you're trying to do? And to CAP's point, commander's intent can't just simply be done with deliver me X. Commander's intent is broader. It's part of an ecosystem, right? It's part of a larger strategy. And so making sure that as potential users, designers, the demand signal for what a lot of this AI is going to do, it means bringing a mentality that isn't, here's my narrow role or mission, etc. Yes, you have to embody that, but you really have to understand where this fits in with the larger knowledge pool. I think one of the most interesting things from a technology or information conversation right now is that we actually don't really understand or respect or appreciate where our relationship with knowledge or information comes from. So, for example, CAP may have a database and you have a database and we're not sharing, etc. But really saying, what information do I need? From who? Who has it? Like, what are those interconnections? And I think that question, along with commander's intent, what do I really want this to help me achieve? Right? Or how do I want to be in a different state than versus just the one-off that Cap mentioned, I think is really where our greatest minds need to be able to take the luxury of a moment and answer some of those questions instead of just running into, well, the leader says we need to use AI, or here's the newest dashboard. I mean, we've got to kind of stop just attacking what I would call pebble level and be like, where does this lie on the beach? What does that look like?
We're getting the end here. I think you've helped me a lot more thinking still to do. I'd like to kind of thank you both for being here and pose a final question to you. As a final thought, in what area of Air Force operations or technological development do you think we need to really, it's kind of being maybe ignored or maybe not getting the resources that it needs, that we need to put some more AI thought into? I understand probably all, but just pick one.
No, if there was places we should be doing it, we'd be doing it, and we are. The biggest need in my mind is exactly where Q was talking there. The idea that we should have every airman and guardian thinking about this. To that end, I would encourage anybody, any airman or guardian, and their families, every Friday at noon Eastern, we have an open call. And that call is, what is the future of AI? And it's got a range of anything from philosophers to neurobiologists to AI geeks like me who give talks on different topics. And so if you go to the Autonomy Capability Team 3 website, you'll see the link. Anybody can join. As I say, philosophers, Dan Dennett, before he died, called in and gave us a talk. We have people from Google, Facebook, universities, etc. I would encourage every airman or guardian to call in and then take the thoughts that you have. And we publish what we're going to talk about that week. You don't have to come every week, but when we hit topics you care about. But anyway, you take those ideas and now you sit back and you spend that time thinking, how could this change my mission in the Air Force or Space Force? What is it that this could bring to that, whether it's reducing the toil of my training or whether it's moving a spacecraft or controlling an uncrewed asset? Doesn't matter. No matter where you are on the spectrum of the warfight, it's all important, and AI will impact it all. And so what I encourage you to do is to do things like this. You come to the Quest meetings, you then spend time to think, and then you actually spend the effort to figure out how I could actually go about implementing that AI capability to change my role in this endeavor we're all on. If we all invest ourselves, we win. I mean, empowering airmen and guardians up and down the chain, civilians and military, our adversaries are not going to do that. They don't trust their people. We do. Okay? If we do this right, we get that enduring. That's the source of our enduring advantage, those airmen and guardians.
What I would just simply add to that is everyone is qualified to be curious. No one is going to give you permission to be curious or to take that moment or to wonder. And it's really something that we have to feel compelled to do. And then finally, to Cap's point, this is a contact sport. Whether that contact is with each other, whether that contact is with the technology, but the reality is that the doing matters, the leaning in matters. And so I was going to pick an area that I'm really excited about as an example is as actually in science. So imagine right now, a lot of the science is actually is fairly, you talk about the science with the other people who do your type of science, right? Or your type of physics or your type of thing. And the reality is that it's where those things intersect that determine whether we want to change the wing shape of a plane. It's not just one discipline. So as an example, I'm really excited about different scientists coming from different levels, but how AI might overlap, for example, physics disciplines or other types of things so that we can actually ask that question about a wing design and get 12 different types of scientists and physics models in that contact sport, asking, wondering, and playing together in a way that previously was quite siloed. So I think the biggest thing to Cap's point is that everyone here needs to lean in and realize whether or not we're prepared for the adversary is their problem. And whether or not we're prepared for the future depends on what they're going to do about it and how much wonder they're going to have for it.
Let me just chime in that when Alexis was talking, I was reminded of, one of the big breakthroughs we've had is I can bring a kid in out of the inner city of Cincinnati and have them using AI to do things to maximize their creative talents. You no longer have to be a coder. You no longer have to study all the math. I recommend you do code and you do study the math, but you don't have to. Any airman or guardian can use AI right now to do things that they personally find interesting in their life. And I hope they are also going to use them to improve their performance for the DAF. That being said, when you're talking about science, I was reminded that coming, I think maybe today on YouTube, is the AI for Humanity 2050 seminar we had last Halloween. So you could see in there, and one of the topics we had was how AI is going to impact scientific discovery. But also in there, we talk about how it's going to impact medicine, how it's going to impact our social and economic needs. How do you address disparities in our society? AI will be a great resource to address those issues that we as a culture need to address. But it starts with airmen and guardians investing their own time. And they can do that by looking at that YouTube video or come to the meetings.
That's going to do it for this week's podcast. The show is recorded, edited, and produced by the LeMay Center's Doctrine Outreach section. Special thanks to our guests, the LeMay Center, and Air University. As always, the views expressed by our panel members are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of Air University, the Air Force, or any government agency. Thank you, and we will see you next time.